out today. And the first stage is that you write a proposal, which needs to be in by the 15th of January. And then from there, it is peer reviewed. You can bribe me as much as you like at halfway stage, but it won't do you any good because it is peer reviewed by people all over the world. So I don't mind being bribed anyway, but it isn't going to get you an Eva London paper. When it's been peer reviewed, then the papers are selected, a programme is written, and you have a 6 or 8 page paper that then goes into our main printed publication. We believe in having a printed one, and that has an ISBN number and all the rest of it, and that is jolly good for waving at people, whether it's CVs, jobs or anything else. Now, if that sounds a little bit out of your league at this stage, we also run something called a research workshop. And a research workshop, and the idea of that is it's work in progress. Many of you may not have a full conference finished paper ready, project all done, dusted, but might have work that you're working on. And the idea of the research workshop is that you actually show what you're doing and where it's up to eminent people from all over the world at Eva London. And you can have 2 pages published in our proceedings, and you can talk to everyone about what you're doing. You may get some amazing advice, you may get someone who will mentor you or help you along the way with it, or whatever. How much does it cost, I can hear you all thinking. The answer is, for doing the research workshop, then it costs you absolutely nothing. Last year we took on about 15 people from FLUX and gave them each an opportunity to do either a full conference paper, or which they did have to pay a little bit of money for in some cases. I don't think anyone from FLUX paid money last year. I think we were good to them. But hey, there you go. But basically the research workshop, which may be something that would be of interest to you, the idea is that you still get 20 minutes to talk to the great and the good about what you're doing. You get 2 pages in the proceedings, so you get your work published with an ISBN. You get mentored by us throughout. Because I can see the other look on some people's faces. I got out of writing a dissertation when I was an undergrad and swore never to do anything like it again. Right, okay, if you're sitting there thinking that, one of the things that we're going to set up, probably in the middle of November, is going to be a little 2-hour session in a London university, teaching you how to write a proposal for a conference. It will work very nicely for our conference, but it will work for any other conference that you might want to put a paper in. Later on, when you've had your paper accepted, if you have your paper accepted, then we'll have another one teaching you how to actually write your paper. In the meantime, we'll have a 3rd one probably teaching you how to do your presentation at the conference. So we're going to mentor people all the way through. We started doing this last year with people from FLUX, and it was very, very successful, and we had a lot of artists who were really saying, I really don't think I can get into this, I don't think I know how to do this. And we had a lot of mentoring online with papers going to and fro saying, I really wouldn't say that if I were you, and you might want to add a little bit about this, or I still have no idea what your project's about 3 pages later, or whatever it may be. But basically we can put it all together and help you. So this is an offer tonight from EVA London, from me and from Nick, saying if you have a project which you would like to have academically published, we will help you write the academic document. If you would like to present it to top academics from all over the world, we will help you do that, either as a research workshop or a full conference paper if we take a look at what you're doing and we think it's worth it. I've brought along with me a couple of copies of our proceedings. They make brilliant draft excluders and door stops. If anyone wants to take one home with them or have a look during the break, they're very, very welcome to. Now, the other thing is, we're not just a London-based organisation, Eva London. We have, this is where I need my cheat sheet, Eva Berlin, which is next couple of weeks, November the 7th. Eva Paris, which is a brand new Eva, and that's running in December. Eva Florence, which has been going for some time, if you fancy a lovely time in the sunshine in Italy. And Eva Minerva Jerusalem, an Eva St. Petersburg, and watch this space for an Eva Warsaw and an Eva Rio, which are both ticking around on the cards at the moment. So if anyone fancies heading down to Rio and doing your paper there instead of London, that's probably very wise of you. I hope you've got the money for the airfare. But basically, we are an international organisation. We are very internationally recognised. Now, the other thing which I did this last year was I put together a crazy idea of mine called Research and Education. And this was to gather together all the major London digital arts colleges and get their students to come in and present to the great and the good who were still there from the EVA conference. And this is only my cheat sheet. This is who came: London South Bank, London College of Communication, Kingston School of Art, Royal College of Art, Greenwich, Hertfordshire, Ravensbourne and Goldsmiths. And Camberwell would have been there as well, but they had to drop out at the last minute because they changed deans, as is their thing. We will be doing the same thing again next year, so we are actually looking to engage with all the top London colleges. And some of the research workshop places that I have will be going to people from these colleges, because I'm offering it to them as well as you. Okay, so there's just a little bit of competition in here, right? But what we are doing this year, normally we have one afternoon of research workshop and we have 8 people who do it. This year we're going to have 2 afternoons, a Monday and Tuesday of the conference. So I have 16 spaces for a research workshop. Research workshop, you don't have to have peer reviewed by lots of people, because I choose who's on the research workshop. Remember that, I choose who does the research. And what I'm looking for is some wonderful ideas. So if you want to come and talk to me, if you want to take a photograph of this, grab my email. If you want to look up Eva London, please do. But we really, really would love to have you have a go at this. And one of the nicest things that's come out of this has been people like Aphra, who does the research workshop one year and then does a full conference paper the next year. And that is where we want to go, right? That is what we want people to do. That is how we want people to get involved in Eva London. So this is yours. It won't cost you any money. You will get loads of help with doing it. We want you to succeed at doing it. We want you to actually come and get involved in our conference. Now, this last year, we did 2 V&A Digital Futures at part of the EVA conference. This year, because of some restructuring in the V&A, there is unlikely to be a V&A Digital Futures at EVA London. But fear not, we have other plans, of which I can tell you nothing at this point, however much of that stuff you pour down my throat. However, when we have the gig Christmas party in Dalston, hopefully I can stop for a minute and I can tell you a bit more about it. But if any of you have the sort of projects, the sort of displays, the sort of demos that you might have thought you'd like to put into a V&A Digital Futures, I would get something ready for next July, because, as the HAL computer once said, something wonderful is going to happen.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I would just like to vouch for what a wonderful experience it has been working with Graham, and obviously now Nick as well with EVA, and my kind of journey from having not had the understanding or knowledge really to go through that process, and then doing it and feeling so proud when I got this publication with my essay in it, you know, and how exciting that is, and being able to be in a auditorium full of esteemed thinkers from all over the world and present your ideas. It's really exciting. Great. I just realised that I've got music playing in the background, which is not going to be good when our next speaker wants to play her video. So I'm very glad I realised right away, which is great. So I will now invite Bishi to the stage, and she can tell you more about her work.
No.
Okay.
No, wait. I'm going to sit in the back stalls.
Right.
Thanks. Do you want to be in this? Yeah. It's just a space bar.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So lovely to see you. Thank you so much to FLUX Events for inviting me to do this little presentation here. There's quite a lot of photos and bits and bobs, so I'll try and squish everything together as quickly as I can. So my name is Bishi. I am a musician, multi-instrumentalist, producer and co-founder of WITCiH, which is the Women in Technology Creative Industries Hub. Aphra and Maria have both been speakers at WITCiH, and it's a platform to celebrate women at the intersection of creative tech, music and science. I raised some money earlier this year and recently just curated a festival, a 3-night festival in Dalston, and we are about to take over a science museum in Bristol called We the Curious on November the 22nd. So tell you a little bit about my journey. Power of the Witch, Bishi, a journey in tech. There I am, early life. So the lady to my right is my mum, and that over there is a poet called Tagore, who is one of the most famous poets of India. He's a little bit like Bob Dylan, but if you imagine Bob Dylan was an architect and a painter and a poet. He wrote over a canon of over 3,000 songs that my mum's a specialist of. And when she came over to the UK in the early 70s, she doesn't like being called an immigrant, but anyway, she moved over here in the 70s and started an Indian classical music festival with Ravi Shankar's cousin, who was his manager, a guy called Birendra Shankar. And so I was very lucky in that I grew up with this collective of artists, and I knew that really the power lay in artists coming together and building something for themselves. And I also played the sitar, and there I am at a gig I did in Trafalgar Square a while back. So when I was growing up, I really adored avant-garde pioneers of electronic music, people like Wendy Carlos, Laurie Anderson, Meredith Monk. Although she's not strictly an electronic musician, she did a lot of mixed media performance, and I was lucky enough to do some voice training with her about a year ago, so that was really fun. And I also love the idea of music and film together, so this is the Kronos Quartet playing one of Philip Glass's one of his scores to Dracula with Bela Lugosi, and that had a huge effect on me as a teenager. So I have released 3 albums now, and I've released them all independently. About 10 years ago, to this week even, I was on Friday night with Jonathan Ross, and everybody thought, oh my God, this career is going to explode for her, blah, blah, blah. And then it didn't, and actually that was a really big opportunity. I see a lot of failure, I see a lot of closed doors as just being an opening for something else. I had a creative partner at the time called Matthew Hardin, and we made all the music and sort of produced and did all of the videos together, but he was a filmmaker and also very interested in integrating music and technology. So this was our piece, Call of the Tiger, which we performed at the Whitechapel Gallery, and that is me in an interactive suit where I was controlling the sound and all the visual parameters. So yeah, that's like not fake, that actually is me. It was really good fun doing this. There I am a little bit more on stage, and yeah, there we go. For my second album, Albion Voice, that's when we really started to explore performance and projection. At the time, music venues really didn't understand. It was just at the dawn of, just before the big audiovisual boom. You know, now you go to gigs and everybody understands that there's going to be an audiovisual element, a 3D element, there's going to be a big extensive light show, which is, especially I think, has revolutionised dance music, so that now dance music gigs have become a really kind of multi-sensory experience. But when we started doing it, everyone just thought we were mad, and they didn't really know, they didn't really know where to book us gigs because we'd need more time to set everything up. It's more like an AV installation than just, lots of people think that with projected visuals, you just, it's just a projector and you just stick a projector in and whack it in and there you go, they didn't understand we needed kind of 4 or 5 hours as opposed to the 1 hour standard kind of band setup. But so yes, this is one of our first projection pieces, and I think I brought a bit of a video. I don't think we can see the whole thing, but this is me on stage at the BFI. I was really scared I was going to fall over. I was really fucking high here. As in, like, I wasn't on anything. I was really high off the ground. It's alright.
Sorry, I thought.
There we go. Yeah, they kept saying to me, like, make sure you don't do anything, because if you fall backwards, that screen is worth about 100 grand. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Really need to know that. Here are a few more pictures from the projection spectacle. It was a full 1 hour show where I performed the entire album as a one-woman show. We did that for a Harper's Bazaar party in Brazil. That was really good fun. And actually, I was a complete technophobe for a long time. I just didn't have any confidence. I'm still trying to work out where that came from because, you know, well, obviously, yeah, society, whatever, blah blah blah. I don't know, but I was really scared of technology. I knew that I loved it. I knew that I really wanted to incorporate it, and you know, and I also seemed to sort of like there was a hole in my brain because I was making demos on Logic, so I clearly didn't fear it that much, but I just had a massive imposter syndrome around it, and you know where these things comes from, like who knows, but. Anyway, so I was approached by a gallery called the Science Gallery, really, really interesting space. They've just opened their space just near Guy's Hospital, and they wanted me to make a piece using the sound of my sleep waves, and I took a Shakespeare sonnet number 43, and I arranged it for 13 voices, and we have the sound of my sleep waves going in and out. Collaborated with another composer called Neil Kaiser, who's an electroacoustic specialist. So he was able to sort of help with all of the electricery, and I was able to learn a lot more about that level of sound production. So yeah, there are my sleep waves. Make of them what you will. I mean, personally, I think it's just really cool that they're electric blue, you know. And then yeah, those visuals in the corner of the church are a visual representation of these brainwaves. So that was really fun. And then, so yeah, the second album cycle came to an end, and I had been collaborating with a few different audiovisual collectives, and I remember thinking that I knew that there were all of these really interesting women doing projects which were tech focused, or you know, musicians or fine artists or sculptors, but I just thought that there needs to be a place for us all to come together just to represent a bit more. And these are some of the women who have inspired me over the years. We have, you know, Ada Lovelace and Bjork and Charlotte Mormon and Hedy Lamarr and Caitlin Aurelia Smith and Delia Derbyshire, and I like the idea of mixing the really classic grand dames of tech with people who are maybe not so well known. So that's Larry Spiegel looking super techie. There's Imogen Heap with her gloves, and there's Pamela Z, who was, I thought it was interesting that she was doing a glove project, 20 years prior, which, yeah, I thought that was kind of cool, doing with that visually together. So I have been hosting these salons on and off at a place in Haggerston called the Barge House, and we had lovely animatronic do a presentation on the history of Gender and Robots. She also wrote a book about them. It was really fantastic. That's Anat Ben David of Chicks on Speed, presenting parts of her digital opera Kairos. That's Mira Kalix, did a really wonderful lecture. Look, hooray, there's Maria. She was talking about her work as one half of Chematica. That was Leslie DeRay, she was an artist in resident of Music Hackspace. It's a really, really special piece. And she was also using similar WITCiH technology to Maria. And this is, oh God, I'm blanking on her name. She's so lovely.
Zara Hussain.
That's it, Zara Hussain. And that's Star, Empress Star here. She is an aerialist and she does a lot of work with lasers. And we had Imogen Heap come and do a presentation with her gloves, and that was really special. This is a really fabulous up-and-coming artist, Rebecca Ubuntu, and they've just been a graduate of BIM, that college, that music college. And that's Professor Dr. Jen Kirby. Oh look, there I am. And so everything has been going really well. At the moment I'm running everything on my own, which I absolutely love doing this project. I think I get so much I feel so inspired by everybody who's involved, whether it's the artist or whether it's people behind the scenes. And when I first came up with the idea of WITCiH, I thought, I wonder if I'm going to run out of people, and that just simply hasn't been the case. But this year I was lucky in that I got both Arts Council funding and I got funding from the PRSF to curate a festival and commission 4 new pieces of work. I was able to develop some of my own work, and it was called WITCiH, the State of Gender, ? So this was a little bit of the flyering, campaigny stuff that went with it. There was some of the headline acts mixed with some of the commissionees, and yeah, this is a little digital flyer that we put together. And there's another little digitally flyer. There we go. So yeah, thank you very much. If you want to get in touch with me, it's witch@gmail.com. I'm all over the Instagram and the Twitter and the Facebook. And at the moment, I'm in the process of editing up a whole load of videos from the festival. And we're about to put a WITCH EP out. And there's a podcast series in development. And it's really full on. I was telling Oliver that most of my life feels like I'm running for a bus, but I'm really into it. I really love doing this project, and it's in a very exciting moment of growth. So thank you everybody, thank you.
Thank you, Bishi. Yeah, absolutely fascinating stuff. So exciting. Great. We're just going to move. We're just going to keep rolling. Yeah, we're just going to keep going. So we have now got Nick Lambert from the Computer Arts Society, who's going to be presenting to us on a PDF. Which I need to full screen. You can just scroll like that. Is that how you do it?
I'll see if I can have the view and then do it.
Oh, sorry, a different way.
There's a full screen.
There, full screen.
That's what I've got.
There we go.
Oh,
Right.
lovely.
Great,
That's
thank you.
right. Thank you so much.
Lovely,
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good to be here this evening, and we've had two very interesting speakers, and I think Bishi's stuff, just trying to follow that is always difficult. I think that's quite a great sort of thing to follow. So yes, Nick Lambert. I am the current chair of the Computer Arts Society, and my own sort of history with this goes back at least 20 years in my own thing. About 20 years ago, I had a crazy idea that perhaps looking into the history and development of art with computers might yield some new ideas about how it's evolved, how the whole sort of, is there a sort of shared aesthetic, people sort of using computers from the sort of earliest times, the 1950s, 60s up until the present, are they sort of driven by the same ideas and concepts, or are they sort of coming at it from a lot of different angles and sort of just happening to use the computer as a platform? All I can say is that there's a bit of both really. There's a sort of a school of computer art that goes all the way back, which is something which I will be talking about this evening, but also a multiplicity of different platforms and concepts. And as we sort of move further into the 90s and the 2000s, of course, that grows and grows. So I was keen to see what the aesthetics were, what the sort of concepts were behind it. And when I started off, I had no idea that there was this organisation called the Computer Arts Society that had started up in 1968. The same year, of course, as Cybernetic Serendipity at the ICA, which is also obviously having its 50th anniversary this year, and the same year that Leonardo Journal started as well, which is something we'll also be hearing about too. So it seems like 68 was a sort of particular stepping off point for arts and technology, and all these sort of significant shows were happening, but also this kernel of an idea which occurred to three, one was an architect, John Lansdowne, one was a cybernetics researcher called George Mallon, and one was a programmer by day, but also a digital musician by night called Alan Sutcliffe, working over at ICL. And they sort of came together through a computer conference called IFIP, and Sutcliffe put a notice on the bulletin board, which in those days was a physical board where you actually wrote things rather than a BBS or anything like that, and said, how about coming together with a Computer Arts Society? And less than a year later, 1969, they had their first art show at the Royal College of Art called Event 1. And so really that's what we're marking with the 50th anniversary of CAS, which amazingly has kept going, though in some years it actually sort of went into hibernation. It sort of disappeared somewhat in the mid-80s for various reasons. And the reason that CAS then restarted was because of the project that I was part of. Paul Brown was and Sir Charlie Gear at Birkbeck, University of London. They, in the early 2000s, just after John Lansdowne passed away, there was a sense that a lot of the work might actually end up being lost, because in a way a lot of this has happened outside the art mainstream. And much of these sort of the works of these early pioneers, and I think obviously not just in computer art, but in many of the areas of media arts, kinetic art and other things, so much happens which perhaps has escaped the notice of the larger galleries. It sort of happens in sort of interesting fringe sort of places. It happens in sort of somewhat off the canon, away from the canons of art history, and therefore we need to reclaim it. And that was the driving sort of force behind our project that was called CASH, Computer Arts, Contexts, Histories, etc. So the great thing was, CASH not only got funding at the time to pull these archives together, but we started talking to the artists themselves, or in some cases their relatives and friends and others who knew them if they obviously sadly passed away at that time. And we pulled together an archive of early British-based computer art that was then passed over to the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2006. And from there has sort of spurred on the creation of a national archive of computer-based art, that Douglas Dodds, who curates that. And actually this Friday, if anyone's interested, there's a symposium called Chance and Control, which is also the name of an exhibition that's going on at the V&A at this moment. And Chance and Control pulls together a lot of those early works and actually shows them all together in context. But we're not just doing that, we're also doing our own show, which my colleague, it's just a black page, right, that my colleague Sean Clark has been putting together. And actually what I'm just showing here really is the PDF of our catalogue, because it just happens to be a very good way to summarise what he's been doing. But basically with Sean, he's actually based in Leicester, and he's used that as a sort of stepping off point for putting together a sort of summation or collection of 20 of the sort of significant artists connected with the Computer Arts Society, and they're just sort of some of the key ones, but not actually, it's not an exhaustive list by any means. And what we're trying to do really is to have a sort of A comparison show going through several decades to illustrate really points of continuity, areas where the aesthetic has sort of come through from the sort of late 60s through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and really this list, again, is going to grow as we sort of move through. But all the artists here tend to use algorithms in some creative way. So that I think links them all together. All this art could be called algoristic. A lot of it's generative, a lot of it's about actually starting with a seed program and letting it run, and actually letting the sort of computer, in a way, do some of the thinking as well as the execution. And that's sort of part of that idea that the computer art should allow for some sort of creative input both by the artist and the computer, and there should be a fusion, as it were, between them both. And we're not saying it's sort of hard AI by any means, but rather these are things that emerge really from the programs, from the experimentation that's being done. And that, I think, is a very established concept in the Computer Art Society, that they were interested from the start, really. What is the sort of special contribution of the computer to the visual arts and to performance and to other areas? And these things are probably a little too small to see, but we had a long-standing publication called Page. That was actually put together initially by Gustav Metzger, who's a very famous artist from the autodestructive sort of area, and somebody who was, in a way, very much opposed to types of, sort of technophilia. But Metzger recognised it was important to engage with technology, even if he felt it was destructive in itself, and therefore he actually welcomed the opportunity to work with CAS and actually perhaps put in some of the most creative sort of input into this magazine Page, which in the sort of pre-internet era was a way of tying together a lot of disparate activity around the world in the digital arts. So oddly enough, despite the fact that they were sort of separated by continents and things, they were still very much in touch with their sort of other computer artists in America. Further afield in Japan, there was quite a lot of activity in South America, particularly in Brazil, and also elsewhere in Central Europe and of course Southern Europe too. So there was actually it was much more than a parochial exercise just in the UK. And I think with events as they are at the moment, we would do well to remember that and think that we should be continuing to look outside the borders. So the CAS 50 collection, it's come together as a show. Actually, these are all works on paper. And that might seem a bit of a retrograde step, and we are obviously interested in preserving the digital works as well. But as Graham was hinting earlier, paper-based works can survive. And in fact, in the course of our sort of original work through the archives as well, we tended to sort of fall back on the outputs that had been done in paper-based physical forms, because actually they'd survived better than the early digital works that of course were held on early formats. You had punch cards, you had magnetic tape, you had a lot of things that were actually quite hard to decipher and read these days, but so long as we had some sort of output, then we could actually do something with it. But these are a whole variety of things I'll just sort of run through. Stephen Bell, an early researcher from University of Kent at Canterbury, but also working for a long time at Bournemouth. Passed through the Slade as well. All these artists had a connection to the Slade School in the early 70s, very interested in the development of algorithms around plants and around animal behaviour. Peter Bales, also Belgian artist, who's actually done a lot of work on music and interactive music systems as well, and the development of sonification of visual form, but also then sort of repeating sound into the visual as well. Boredom Research, Vicky Eiley and Paul Smith. So they also work with sort of biological data, but recently they've been using things, sort of data sets like, for instance, the spread of malaria and sort of unusual sort of things relating to the sort of visualization of disease and biodiversity. And they then sort of translate those into evolutionary algorithms. For instance, this is called Fragments of Lost Flight, and that sort of shows the evolution of wings, as it were, but actually expressed through algorithms. Daniel Brown, both a designer and a computer artist, actually the son of Paul Brown, who was one of the early members of Computer Art Society. There's something of a sort of familial sort of ongoing production of art. Award-winning designer who, amazingly, is actually himself, he is himself disabled and therefore controls the computer mostly with a head-mounted target and voice control. And yet is able to, put these targets, put those skills to great use through programming, and especially through his own generative designs. For instance, the work he did for the Darcy Thompson Museum, Growth and Form, and this is really, these rather wonderful floral sort of forms that sort of grow and fade away. and also other sort of algorithmic prints as well. And you can see there, gradually there's a sort of aesthetic continuity of sorts here. And then Paul Brown, his father, worked extensively then in the early days with the Slade School, and then following that he was one of the pioneers of 3D computer animation in the UK, but particularly interested in these tessellating forms. And you can see as these things gradually sort of come together, there's some very interesting connections. Sean Clark himself, working with essentially cybernetic principles, and very interested in works that actually communicate and talk to each other. He works a lot with Esther Rollinson and other artists, and they often produce large collaborative works. And Ernest Edmonds was his mentor. Ernest, both a mathematician and a systems artist, really intrigued, and this is actually even sort of from the sort of pre-computer times. Can you create a generative system, something that the constructivists were very interested in as well, the mathematics of building pictures and actually creating geometric forms. But a lot of Edmonds' work from the 60s and 70s was also about interactivity at the very early stage, and how you can actually communicate between pictures and people using early networks. And some of his artworks are actually set up to observe each other, and they're gradually sort of changing colours that can be repeated and sort of recognised by other artworks that are in the series but may be geographically distant, so they sort of transmit to each other these colour forms as well. Sue Golfer, again, sort of on a sort of constructive sort of level, she also works a lot with, she's one of the directors of IZEA International, you know, a great force in the computer arts world, and many other things like SIGGRAPH. But Stu's own background in fine arts and printing, sort of looking at the optical sort of characteristics of form and art as well. And Desmond Henry, particularly interesting as a sort of very early pioneer, working in a sense before the digital computer, that he actually had an analog computer salvaged from the Second World War. It was actually the bomb aiming computer from a Lancaster bomber, repurposed to actually move pens around in a variety of ways that would actually, as you can see, translate into these quite extraordinary forms. And one of several artists from that period, the others being the Whitney brothers, who also used a similar sort of system to manoeuvre cameras around a static piece of artwork. But Henry's works are particularly intriguing, and you know, they just deploy the sort of these sinusoidal forms that emerged from programming an analog computer, but sort of way ahead of his time. Again, a lot of these artists have spanned, as it were, the world of technology, world of engineering in particular, and the arts. And they sit in that sort of particular zone where, as you might remember, C.P. Snow talked about the two cultures, talked about the sort of this sort of gulf between the arts and the sciences that he saw emerging in the 1950s. Well, in a way, a lot of these artists are trying to answer that, and they're trying to sort of address that idea that there shouldn't be a gulf between the arts and the sciences, and there shouldn't be mutual incomprehensibility. And in many ways, that's what the Computer Arts Society was intended to bridge. William Latham, probably known to some of you, very interested in evolutionary art forms and also in games which incorporate evolution and algorithms as well. Sort of most known for these very alien-looking forms that actually breed together, and he sort of breeds these sculptures, creating sort of almost a sort of fitness landscape, and sort of develops from those and the forms that he wants to feature the most. Andy Lomas, similar in certain respects but quite different in others, an award-winning digital animator, and sort of works currently based at Goldsmiths, but actually also exhibiting as all those institutions as well. And Andy Lomas has been quite literally evolving these very disturbing animations that, as it were, they sort of subdivide like cells and gradually sort of... Yeah, so they subdivide, change, and sort of also decay as well. There's something quite unusual, and they're live simulations running on a selection of very powerful graphics cards. So the back end of this is quite complex, and but the front end is incredibly organic. And I think it's that sort of transition between the hard edge sort of science at the back, and then the sort of the front end is something that looks almost sort of natural, and yet very unnatural, and deliberately so. And especially, he's branching out at the moment, literally into three-dimensional vases that incorporate some of these forms, but also take 3D printed forms as well. Stephen Scrivener, a colleague of mine, working with me at Ravensbourne, but also a long-standing digital artist who actually did the very first practice-based art PhD in the UK. back in the late 1970s under Ernest Edmonds, and again, another systems artist drawing on the sort of constructivist heritage, especially people like Paul Klee, but using generative systems then to come up with those systems. And just to show us, we've having reached the end, a sort of bit of a whistle-stop tour there, but several of the shows that we've done thus far, the Leicester show, also the show that was at Brighton, which we did a few weeks ago, Brighton Digital Festival. We've shown at Eva also, and we hope to tour the show sort of further. And this just gives you an idea really of how it was presented. But that's just the physical end. There's also a sort of digital back end for us as well. A lot of documentation. Some of the original artworks actually functioning as digital artworks too. We want to take this further. We want to sort of show really the history summed up in this this exhibition. And you can see there just some of the material. The other thing, Aphra, is this connected to the net? Can I get into the right?
Yeah, I think
I
so.
want to show just one more thing, which I hope I haven't overrun my time. Quit out of that one. Anyway, thank you very much. Because I want to show just one other outcome, which in a way it is part of Computer Art Society, but it's also something that's been very exciting, and I've been lucky enough to be involved with as well. Actually, no, it's not Semster, it is Senster. Yes, there we go then. Bah. That's right. Right. You can't see it in too much detail, but I just wanted to flag this up. So there was an artist called Edward Ignatowicz, Polish national, who worked in the UK for a very long time. Edward was actually a roboticist, essentially, sort of much ahead of his time in the 1960s. He was commissioned by Philips to create this enormous sculpture called by the standards of his time, called the Senster. And I just hope I can find a good picture, which is a little better than the ones there. Just give it a second as it loads them up. I'll just explain. So it was a huge sound-activated robot. It was actually shown by Philips in Eindhoven at their sort of Evoluon, a kind of futuristic centre. But this was from about 1970, 1974. But eventually Philips decommissioned it, never told Edward Ignatowicz where the sculpture ended up, and unfortunately it sort of disappeared off the map. And then a long time later, in fact, pretty much last year, the Polish University AGH, based in Krakow, recovered the Senster and found, we'll just see if this gives a better
I
idea.
don't know why that's not loading.
Oh well.
Work it on here. Is it not very good? I'm just trying.
Oh, no. Do not worry. I'll describe it even if I can't
Very
show the
cool.
pictures. Blast! But they haven't got the picture of the actual thing, which is what I was looking for. I'll describe it. Basically, the Polish University AGH have recovered the entire sort of structure of the Senster that was thought lost, and it was outdoors for a long time. It was never designed to be exhibited outdoors, but it was actually just sort of put in front of a Dutch factory and left there as a sort of gate mascot. But basically, the university have recovered it. They've actually made it work again. And I was lucky enough to be there at Krakow 2 weeks ago to see the working version of the Senster, now sort of back. It's fully activated. It works with sound as it always did, drawing a huge crowd, and they hope to tour it, and I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to bring it to the UK and actually show it all again, and maybe we'll even get to see a picture if this thing loads up a little faster, who knows, but if not, look it up online, Senster, AGH, and see what, it's a very exciting piece of media archaeology, and that's the sort of thing I'll live for. I'm very interested to see that. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
If you want to join CAS, the best thing to do is look us up on Facebook. Computer Art Society, that's the best way to join. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Cheers, Aphra.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
I've just realised that I hadn't been doing questions and answers, and I also realised that there's quite a lot of people at the back. I don't know if anybody wants to come and sit at the front. You're more than welcome to do that. And apologies if there's less seats than there should be. We'll try and sort that out in the break. I'm going to just blast straight through with our next speaker rather than do questions, but it would be great if you have questions for people to talk to them in the break. And then we'll be doing a panel discussion afterwards, and we can bring in a bit more of a dialogue with everybody. So let me just grab back into my slideshow, and I will introduce Heather, who will come and talk to you about London Laser.
Thank you. So, how are we doing? Number 4 of, are there 5 of us?
5,
5
yeah.
of us. Stamina, and then you get a drink, and then you get to ask questions. Okay, my name's Heather Barnett. I'm an artist working with living systems and imaging technologies. I co-lead the MA Art and Science at Central St Martin's, University of the Arts London. I'm here tonight to talk about LASER, which has got nothing to do with lasers. It stands for Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. So it's a thing like this, an evening rendezvous for people that are interested in art, science, technology, to come together and to hear people and talk to people and network and meet others with like minds. It's part of an international talk series. There are lasers in 35 different host organisations. They're hosted by universities across the globe, but they're established to be informal and free and open to the public. So if you find yourself in any of these places, you can go to a laser talk and hear some interesting things from artists, scientists, technologists. And you can check leonardo.info/laser talks or hashtag laser talks on all the usual social media platforms if you're travelling around. It's part of, it's associated with Leonardo and the International Society for Art, Science and Technology. And as was mentioned earlier, Leonardo is celebrating its 50-year anniversary. So Leonardo is a journal for art, science and technology. They publish papers and artworks for anybody that doesn't know it. But they've really been trailblazing and advocating for interdisciplinary practice, creative practice and innovation and education for many, many years. So there may be some celebratory events going on to celebrate Leonardo. So the London branch of LASER I started up in 2014, and it's hosted at Central St Martin's. It was until last year co-hosted with the University of Westminster as well. And it is kind of run from the MA Art and Science as an extracurricular activity. It's co-organised by staff and students. You can see all the talks that we've had since 2014, and I counted them up. We're one shy of 100 speakers since we started in 2014. And a lot of people give talks, but we also encourage presentations, performances, interactive things. So we've had kind of group meditations, live experimentation, and all sorts of interesting presentations, including Paul Friedlander, I've just spotted down here, who did kinetic light sculpture.
And I'll be doing
laser.
another one of those things very shortly. I'll tell you lots about it later.
Okay. And also, we've had 3 out of your list, Nick. Warden Researcher presented at Laser, Andy Lomas, and William Latham as well. So you can check out londonlaser.net. All the talks are archived, the videos are there. They're also on a YouTube channel, London Laser Videos. And it's very eclectic. We have people contributing from a range of disciplines in a range of ways. Some of them are themed around particular subjects, some of them are randomly thrown together, and they're often the most interesting ones. It's, as I said, it's co-organised by students on the MA Art and Science and myself, and this year it's a complete student takeover, so the students are organising all the events, and I want to introduce the 2 programmers for this year's London Laser. So that's Lois Bentley and Becky Lyons, who are waving in the audience there. So if you have questions about the laser events, do ask them as well as me, because they're really in charge at the moment. I'm nearly the spokesperson. We have an event coming up in 2 weeks' time. It's called Rethinking Space, and it's in 2 parts. So we've got a talks part 7 till 9 p.m. And that's hosting a plasma physicist, an artist, an astronomer, UCL physicist, and it'll be chaired by Nicola Triscott, Director of Arts Catalyst, who I'm sure most of you will be aware of. Arts Catalyst's work at the intersection of art, science and technology. Earlier on in the day, starting at 5:15, is a play lab, so more interactive. This is one of the things the students wanted to do when they took over, was to have more interactive, hands-on activities to complement the talks. So each of the events that we've had this year have had a play lab earlier on, which is a smaller population, but doing hands-on workshops. And we've got some meteorites from the Natural History Museum coming in to be handled and looked at. So if you want to get your hands on some meteorites very carefully, come along. And we'll also be doing some sculpture and image making workshops exploring gravitational pull and imaging. The talks of the events are free, but they are booking up very, very quickly. So if you'd like to come along, go to London Laser Labs on Eventbrite and register there. And if you do book on Eventbrite on Klee, which any event organisers in the audience will recognise, is if you book, please come.
Yeah.
There's so much going on in London at the moment that everyone's going, I want to go to that, and that. And then when it comes to it, you don't quite make it. And it's really, really frustrating if you're an event organiser.
Yeah.
There's some nods down here from Flux.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, hope to see some of you there. If you have any questions about the laser talks next year, we are waiting to get funding confirmed to confirm our programme. Some events, hopefully one exploring remote residencies, including Lab Verde in the Amazon, where they've had artists and scientists working in the Amazon forest, and some other things in the pipeline. So watch this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
It's just so exciting to hear about all these organisations and what everybody's doing, and how we're also so closely related, and you know how exciting that actually is. We're all together in one room, so let's make some, I don't know, big decisions or something. So yeah, in the heart. So I will now ask Ulla to come up and talk to us about her project, which has a slightly different spin on it, and she'll be able to tell you a bit more about that now. Thank you. And then we'll have a break and drinks.
Thank you, Ulla. Great.
So you can just picture this. Yeah, lovely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here. Right, so my name is Ulla Tomoshuk and I'm a research associate in the Center for Performance Science. So a little bit about my background. So I'm a public health researcher, and for my PhD, can you hear me all right? Yeah. So for my PhD, I have investigated different aspects of social relationships and how they link with different elements of both mental and physical health. And I have started a research group called SOCA, Social Connections, Cohesion and Health, for different researchers interested in the association between social relationships and health across different disciplines. So at the moment I'm based in the Center for Performance Science, so it's a partnership between Royal College of Music and Imperial College. And together with my colleagues who are psychologists, economists, performance scientists, as well as social and qualitative researchers, we're working on a project called HEARTS, which investigates health, economic and social impact of the arts. And basically the main objective of the HEARTS project is to offer a major advance in both understanding as well as documenting the scope of the arts in benefiting people's lives as well as impacting on society. And we hope to achieve that through generating high quality academic research, so especially using large scale population based studies to investigate the associations between health and well-being, social relationships, as well as their health economic impact for different populations, including actually artists themselves who are often overlooked in these studies, And we hope that this research will offer an alternative to previous studies which tended to focus on these small-scale interventions, usually targeting specific populations and evaluating impact of these single arts-based interventions and the kind of benefits that people derive from taking part in them. Right. And we also hope to advance our understanding of this dialogue by connecting with some exciting arts and health partners and researching these associations with them further, as well as providing some innovative solutions at the intersection of arts, science and technology. So these are some existing HEARTS partners, and we had a very interesting meeting in September where we discussed the ways we can collaborate, including developing some guidelines on health and well-being of performers across different art forms, because we're very much aware that there is, in the domain of public health, there's a lot more evidence on certain art forms, for example music, compared with other art forms such as interdisciplinary art. So when I do the kind of literature search for the kind of work that I do, there's very little on certain art forms. So we'd like to change that. So why now? Well, the 2017 APPG report on arts, health and well-being has generated a lot of interest in this topic, as well as showcased some of the most promising evidence on these associations so far. And a few weeks ago, the government has released a strategy for tackling loneliness, in which my colleagues and I have contributed to. And these are some of the recommendations from that report, for which I thought that partnerships with artists such as yourselves, and especially with larger art networks, would be particularly beneficial. So the timing of this meeting was particularly fortunate. So as you can see, some of the recommendations are for the job centers, so schools, businesses, to think of ways to open up the space for community use, especially for younger people, and for the Arts Council to work with public health providers to provide arts and cultural programs as part of planned expansion of social prescribing, as well as to provide better evaluation and measurement of the impact that library services have in reducing loneliness, and that could extend to other cultural institutions as well. So how can we work together? My colleagues and I often apply for small pots of money for a seminar series, which could be a nice way for us to exchange knowledge, as well as we can think of working on some publications together. Also, Imperial College hosts an annual event, which is an annual festival open to Imperial researchers to showcase their research and their work. And this year it's extended to lots of other cultural organizations around Exhibition Road, and the organizers are particularly keen to have panel discussions around art and science, as well as some interactive exhibitions and some performances. So my team has successfully participated in the festival in previous years, and the organizers are very keen on the kind of interactive activities and performances we have provided in the previous years. So what it means is that they're usually very accommodating when it comes to space, and they basically usually try to do their best to give us the best possible spots. And since this year we have all these different organizations taking part, we're having a meeting next week to discuss possible stages and performance venues that might be available this year. And if that's the case, we'll try to reach out with a call for some artworks as soon as we can. So the deadline is coming up soon, but another challenge for this particular festival is that 50% of all visitors are families with children, so that has to be taken into account. So all exhibitions or performances have to be family or children friendly, and I guess quite cheery as well. Yes, but I guess it's worth the trouble, because the organizers estimate, based on previous years, that the festival tends to reach around 100,000 visitors. We could also collaborate on other public engagement events, possibly in collaboration with some of our existing Hearts partners and their existing venues. And we would also be very keen to discuss the possibility of evaluating your planned exhibitions or events. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, please come and talk to me afterwards or drop me an email on ula.moshuk@rcm.ac.uk.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Welcome to our wonderful speakers from this evening, and we're now going to launch into a panel discussion which Oliver and I have prepared lots of questions for the speakers, but we also would like to take questions from the audience, and this would be a chance for you to ask our speakers, about their organisations and any further information that you would like. So the panel is it's centred around networks. So it's looking at key organisations within the media arts in London, and we want to know, so it's a chance for you guys to meet them, for them to meet you, and for us to try and hash out some ideas of what we can do to kind of champion the media arts in London and art, science, technology dialogues. So I will start with a first question, and we'll sort of start taking a bit of a dialogue backwards and forwards. So one of our things that we're very interested in, being artists that work with technology, we'd like to find out a bit about what you think the current climate for artists working in the media arts or with art and technology is like in the UK at the moment. Would anybody like to begin with that question?
Yeah.
Start us off.
Someone's got to. I think it's probably no different to what it always has been in many ways. I've been in education for 30 years, and the first 2 or 3 years after you leave university, whether it's as an undergrad, an MA or a PhD, are absolute buggers. And it doesn't matter what dizzy height you have reached. That is actually the state. And if one markets oneself, if one pushes oneself, if one really works ridiculously hard at that as well as your art, then at any stage along the line, from when I first got involved with students in the 1990s through till now, I believe it to be one and the same. But if you just sit there and wait for the phone to ring, it ain't going to happen. And I do think that there's not anything that's changed that you can sort of say, oh, there's been recessions and all the rest. Well, there's always been excuses like that, and this isn't the time for excuses. It's the time for anyone who really believes in their own art to get off their butt and actually write things like for Eva London, exhibit themselves right, left and centre wherever they can, up their profile at every possible opportunity, and make it happen for yourself. And I'm sorry if that sounds a mean thing to say, but if you don't make it for yourself, no one else is going to do it for you.
I think in terms of the scene, I think there are possibly more venues now than there were. There's a whole range of potential competitions. I might mention Lumen, for instance, but also I think there are certainly more courses in this area, and perhaps that means there are more people actually sort of creating friction against each other, sort of finding out more and actually experimenting more as well. I mean, I think because the technology is a lot more democratically spread than it was. I mean, that's not to say that there are things which are kind of unobtainable for many of us, but still, I think as a baseline, now that there's a lot more of it about, it's actually a lot easier to get into, and therefore I think the skills and the technology. And in fact, Bishi said something interesting earlier, that she previously described herself as a technophobe, and yet was also using logic and things, and has gotten to Ableton. But she also said that as of recently, the fact of these YouTube tutorials and other things makes it possible to actually solve some problems for oneself when it comes to tech. And I think if you're able to get off the ground on that side, then the creative side, the more important and interesting side to me, also will follow, because then you can actually find those solutions, but also work more effectively, more creatively with it. So I think just from that point of view, I would say that there's more happening, or perhaps we're more aware of what's happening because we're more connected in other ways.
Absolutely. Did anyone want to?
Okay, yeah, I think probably my perspective is probably more centred around a broader interdisciplinary art and science kind of area than specifically media arts, but of course there's a huge amount of crossover. And we think that it's 50 years ago that we had cybernetic serendipity and the birth of the Computer Arts Society, and in New York the Experiments in Art and Technology. That it's surprising that after 50 years technological arts are not mainstream still.
Yeah.
I think we're on the verge of mainstream. I don't know why that is, whether it's just difficulty with obsolescence and kind of conservation and attitudes within the art market that kind of keeps it out of some mainstream galleries. And obviously I'm making it a big generalisation. A lot of big institutions are exhibiting media arts and interdisciplinary arts. So that's kind of one thought about over 50 years since those really groundbreaking events. I'm surprised we're not in a different place. But it is a very exciting time. There are so many festivals and competitions and activities that people can access, Ars Electronica and SIGGRAPH and ISEA conferences. And social media makes it, the global network very friendly and accessible, which is really nice. I think one of the most exciting things that I see happening is the kind of, which is probably kind of particular to my area, is the biohack and the kind of Fab Lab and this sort of DIY and makerspace kind of territory, taking things out of universities and into communities. I don't know if some of you may know Hackteria, which is a nomadic hack endeavour. It's a very kind of loose network, but they do pop-up labs in the middle of India and in remote places, and bring people together to look with, to work with science, technology, and creative practices. So that's a thought of sort of where we are now. I think that's a really growth area.
Add something to that. So I think there's increasingly more research on the mental health effects of use of technology, obviously, but the more you actually describe the kind of work that you do, I've realized that this is perhaps something that is missing in the public health research, that I actually personally haven't seen much research done on the kind of mental health and well-being impacts of engaging with this particular art form, so media arts and technology arts. So I think that's possibly something to explore, because you could imagine that there could be a very distinct pathways linking this particular art form compared to others with mental health and well-being. So
yeah, fascinating. Yeah.
I was going to say as well, there's another factor here, which is of course the creative industries, or at least the perception of what the creative industries might be. There's a kind of a halo effect which is beneficial in some ways, I think, to the sort of, the existence of a digital art or media art scene. But equally, I find the whole creative industries thing a bit problematic in itself as well. And sometimes, yes, it leads to a concentration of talent and a sort of, a thriving scene in some respects. But I think the expectations around that term and the way that it's been used as an instrument of policy and other things can actually sort of also dilute or detract from some of the real interesting experimentation that goes on as well. That perhaps, we're all perhaps involved in those creative industries in some way or other, but it's increasingly becoming a sort of an economic sort of activity in itself, which I think takes away from some of the more subversive or perhaps some of the more sort of intriguing sort of things that were maybe being done about 10, 15 years ago. So that's another aspect as well. I mean, if anyone's got any more thoughts on that, I'd be interested to hear them.
Yeah, should we fling it out? Anybody have any questions? Flinging it. It's flung. Come on, someone boomerang me back. Blair. Got a question? Or a comment? No? Sorry, that was mean. That was very mean. Yes.
Hello. I guess for Laser, we make efforts to engage the public. I mean, its nature is that it has to be public facing, and we actively encourage the general public. We're interested to know, kind of from the other organisations, how you are bringing in people that maybe are on the outskirts of academia, probably aren't as well versed and entrenched in the subject matter that you are, but how you can kind of start to build a bridge with non-academic audiences, I guess.
Yes. Anyone?
That's why I'm here tonight. It's something which, funnily enough, came up at EVA London about 2 years ago, where someone said your conference is better known in Singapore than it is in Shoreditch, which was the Barb #1, and I think we've actually attempted to address that over the last 2 years. And one way has been to actually engage with a lot more London-based universities, and the other way has been to engage with the likes of FLUX and one or two other people at the V&A and so on, and Digital Futures at the V&A, Lumen Prize, who we're going to be working with again this next summer, and so on. So there's actually something slightly bigger to it, because without doing any politics, which I'm going to avoid like the plague at this moment in time, at the same time, if all the sort of organisations that we have, all the EVA London's, Lumen Prize, CAS, your organisation and so on, actually collaborate a bit more together, then we actually stand a fighting chance of being a voice to whatever the government of the day may be, rather than them having some professor of digital arts in Northumberland who happens to be a drinking buddy of the MP who's in charge of the whole system in the ministry, who then writes the entire document of what the hell we're doing for the next 10 years. And I think it's important that we, as a group, collaborate more together and actually are able to be a fairly non-political but fairly clear voice of digital art in the United Kingdom today.
There's one organisation, I mean, I wouldn't say, much as I think that CAS has tried to do, Computer Art Society has tried to engage in various ways, especially through museums actually. I think that's one source of, sort of a larger, wider demographic, but acknowledging even then the demographic sort of constraints on museums. But one organisation I would point to is, I think, having a lot of success at the grassroots and sort of working extensively with communities is Furtherfield. And the Furtherfield Gallery, Mark Garrett and Sir Ruth Catlow, I mean, they've been doing that for a very long time, very successfully. And I think their model is something that ought to be shared and explored further by other organisations as well. They're really good at mobilising and getting out there, and I think, comes from their own background in community radio and early internet cafes and other things. So, yeah, more power to them, and I think we could learn from them too.
Just to echo the importance of networks. And we've been really fortunate to work with these really amazing big institutions like the South Bank and Young Vic and all our neighbours in South Kensington. But I think we've been also really fortunate that they all somehow happen to get along, and that really helps with our research and really helps with our impact, because it just makes our messages stronger. But I think, yes, and also Imperial Festival and some of the activities connected to universities, that really helps to create that really conducive hub and dialogue. But I think some of the things that you have mentioned, obviously there's still a lot of problem with communicating these messages and all these political issues that are there. But I think things are slowly changing. We had a really positive experience with the strategy on tackling loneliness, and I think people are slowly beginning to listen.
Yes, well, that's one success. Or that we now have a Minister of Loneliness.
Yes, the world's first Minister on Loneliness, and we should definitely ride that wave while it lasts.
Yeah.
You can help. Okay. Cool. Would it be okay if I answer it on behalf of FLUX as well? Because I am facilitating, but we're also an organisation, so I thought maybe I could just jump in on that. So with FLUX, we started and have been mostly an artist peer network. So we have events like this where artists come and we have sort of discussions and conversations, and we bounce off each other and we collaborate. But this year, we decided to do some public-facing events. So we did a big exhibition called Art in Flux at Ugly Duck in May, where we showcased some of our wonderful artists, some sitting at the front here. And we had a series of performance evenings, talks, and an exhibition, and we invited the public to come along to see these things. We also had invited universities and the local community through Ugly Duck and the local councils to get people involved with that. shortly after that first exhibition, we had our second exhibition. So 2 exhibitions nearly within a month, well, within a month of each other. It was pretty hectic. The second exhibition was a community outreach project. It was called Aya, and Oliver was very much the lead on that project with the artist Sarah Chowdhury. So it was hosted in Oliver's studio space called Maxilla Space, Oliver and Kira's studio space called Maxilla Space, which is in the vicinity of the Grenfell Tower. And the project was a series of workshops that happened over a weekend on Islamic digital patterning that the artist did with local community, so families. These individual patterns were then translated into an animation, so these one individual things became one whole animation that was then projected back into the community in the vicinity of the tower, and it was meant to kind of promote this idea of collaboration and the coming together of people. This was also exhibited alongside Zara Hussein's work, Ben Johnson's and Sarah Chowdhury's in an exhibition. So this was really the first time that FLUX did something that was more to do with the local community and was in response to, obviously, the Grenfell tragedy. And we think that that was successful. We were really happy with how it went, and everybody that came and did the workshop, they were so proud to see their work alongside these other artists and projected into the, in as this piece. And it was also shown at the Portobello Film Festival. So it was really nice for the community to be a part of something more sort of highbrow, I guess, in a way. Cool. So that was FLUX. So shall we ask any, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, so on the back of that is thinking about the fact that we're making digital art and yet our means of distribution and expression relies on traditional ways of art. So we have a lot more people public on phones and online. How are you aiming to show some of the works? Is it possible to show some of the works through those forums as opposed to sort of going down the traditional route of here's an exhibition, here are people attending this exhibition. Should we not be thinking the digital is the media as well as the means of distribution, and that actually allows us to capture perhaps impact data in a much more contemporary way?
Anyone want to come?
There have been some initiatives recently to, in some cases, use the blockchain as a way of just not just distributing, but also keeping track of digital artworks, but more generally to use phones and other sort of media, using apps, for instance, developed specifically for sort of distribution of art. And I'm struggling to remember the specific name of the. If anyone else can remember, there was at least one art sort of firm that was looking at commercialising their artworks through this method. I know the Lumen Prize did explore some of that as well at one stage, and so there was a US-based firm who was doing that. I can't recall their name offhand. I beg your pardon?
Artsy?
Yes, Artsy. That's right. Artsy was one of the ones doing it. So I'm not sure how successful their model has been, but it is, using micropayments or PayPal or other things, you could feasibly distribute works or do it for free and sort of find other methods to actually just draw people in. But I think having a sort of gallery without walls, having that sort of idea of sort of spreading the museum without walls in a sort of digital sense would be worthwhile. And I think that should be.
Serpentine is doing some stuff.
Are they? All right.
Yeah, so Serpentine commissions a digital website, which either has like a gaming function. So far, they've just been really ugly. Right? Don't tell them I said that.
Well, fair play, but if it isn't working, they should know. Yes.
But it's meant as a point, because it's meant to be using digital found objects, which are meant to be ugly. But they've found that as a way of increasing visitor numbers, because it then spreads. I mean, obviously they're a huge institution and have tons of people in the database.
Exactly. None of the people will see. Excuse me.
So, and I think there are lots of examples, and any media will be used by artists and subverted and manipulated. I think maybe the question, because I think it's why doesn't it feel like it's consolidated? And maybe it's a curatorial question of how do you curate things that are distributed and pervasive and kind of out there through this variety of media. So yeah, kind of curation question maybe, and maybe a conservation question as well of how do you collect and preserve and protect digital artworks. You know, there's a huge problem. And you know, if anyone's interested in conservation of digital artworks, I know CSM, Central St Martin's, the museum, are doing a symposium next February, I think it is. I think the 19th of February. Looking at specifically conservation questions about digital works and I think specifically VR. But I think they'll also be looking at AR. So that's just something that comes to mind. So curatorial and conservation, I think maybe. Do we have any conservators or curators in the audience?
No, but I can give you some anecdotal evidence that I found out this week. I've got terabytes of past works that I've done that are completely inaccessible right now because the hard drives are corrupted. I still have some printouts. I've been photographing the printouts of the digital art to be able to actually take them into the future, which is a very interesting thing.
The project that I was doing the last year with University College Oxford was to take one of their alumni and take 400 of their photographs, which were original Kodachrome slides, copy them, restore them, and then put them in sheets which were the right size for the archive box, together with the text, because I'm scared that photographs end up on one server and the text ends up on another server. And by using pigment ink printing, which is a 13th century technology, which is already proven in University College Oxford, because they've got manuscripts from the 13th century that are still the right colour now, and by actually using a particular paper, a Canson rag paper, because that's the most sensible to use, there's no reason why the pictures that we put into University College Oxford, the photographs and their context, won't be there in 500 years or 700 years' time. So this is my time machine for sending digital photographs and artwork into the future. Now, it doesn't work with moving image, and it doesn't work with all the huge amount of images that we have available. So I'm a bit like the first officer on the Titanic saying, I can only save a very small amount of you. But that is fundamental. That is fundamentally a way in which a curator today could choose the most important work as an insurance policy to send down in time, and could make prints different sizes. So we tell scholars of 500 years from now which were the most important pieces of digital artwork for us and why. And that's the project I'm working on. Paul, do you want to say?
Yeah, I want to say, off the right moment.
It's both a kind of question and a comment, because I'm aware that certainly I am, and I expect a few other people here would describe their work as installations.
Yeah.
And installation art is by its nature intended to be immersive. It's intended to be an experience that you need to visit and to be in the live presence of the actual work. So any document you create of it, however good that document is, it's still a document. It separates you from it. It doesn't actually in any way give you the real sense of actually being in the presence of the work of art. And we mentioned earlier on Ralph Metzner, somebody who intentionally created auto-destructive art. But what I found throughout my life is I've unintentionally created work that has had to be destroyed. The sheer scale of my ambitions to create large-scale installations, and I started out working in stage lighting and stage design a lot, so that influenced my desire to work on a big scale. And of course, we often see photographs of old stage shows and think, oh, what wonderful things were done for those shows. And of course, sometimes an enormous amount of effort goes into producing those amazing shows, and yet afterwards all we have is a few photographs to remind us. And it seems that what's missing here, and I'm not quite sure where this question's going, or whether it's really a question more than the comment is, that there's this huge amount of transient, ephemeral, and fascinating, very emotional material that's being created by artists and designers, and we have no real way of capturing, storing, or preserving it. And that's part of the magic, in a sense, because people say, oh, I went to that light festival, and light festivals are a relatively new invention in terms of opportunities coming along. I know it's been really good these last 10 years or so that suddenly emerged, yet another way of connecting with the public. But it's an ephemeral thing. You go along and you experience this wonderful sensation of a whole city centre. Or recently I was in a lonely wild island on the Welsh, on the Swedish west coast, and it was just the last thing you would ever expect in a wilderness to find all these works of light art. So I would love to find a way of being able to communicate on a longer time scale into a wider world these experiences, but I have no idea how it could be done. So yeah, I pass this back.
To that, you have the element of interactivity, and this is how on earth do you observe that?
Yes. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone want to come back on that, or I'll have a little go?
All right.
I'll have a little go. Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's a really key sort of topic. I mean, Manuel would say, who does live audio visual performance, that you don't need to preserve it. It is in the moment, and that's the essence of it, and that's what makes it amazing. But obviously, all of us who are interested in legacy or history, or all those types of things, and preservation, would say no. But we want people to be able to see this thing later on down the line, and to remember this moment in time, and these technologies and these things, and why it's important, and that we're all sitting here and we are creating artworks, and we might want them to go ahead into the future. I've actually created an artist peer resource called art-ology.co.uk, which has begun to tackle some of these questions for media artists. So you can have a look on that website, and in there's a lot of guidelines for how you might prolong the life of your media artwork, what materials you might use, what you might consider in terms of your sustainable footprints, things like this. So that's kind of my project that I've begun, that maybe starts to figure out how we prolong the life of these things. But they'll not last forever. And I'm fascinated by this idea of creating a digital space that could be curated by people, or organisations like us, or actual curators, and where we could showcase this stuff to the world, not just in London right now. Isn't that a fascinating idea? With VR. I don't know.
Tomorrow belongs to me, chorus.
So I can go back to my questions now, which are nicely prepared, or I can ask again to the audience if anybody had anything else they wanted to add.
What was that web address you just said?
It's www.art-ology.co.uk. Yeah. So I'll go back to my questions. So we have spoken a lot about there being festivals, competitions, organisations like ours that have all grown up, and we're contributing to the discourse of art and technology, art and science, art and the media arts. So we've kind of all grown up though, potentially, because there isn't a big institution or organisation that is an umbrella for all of these things. And I just wondered what you thought about that. There's in lots of other countries in the world, there are, the art and science hub, or the, in different institutions, whereas the UK just doesn't really seem to have that. And I just wondered if you could shed a little bit of light on why you think that is, or what we could do to create something, etc. Does anyone want to? Yeah.
I'll just say fact. We've got fact.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Which is, what does fact actually stand for? Foundation of art, computer technology, or creative technology?
It must be.
Something art and creative technology. Yeah, in Liverpool.
That's right.
Do people know fact?
Yeah.
I mean, so they're kind of pretty big trailblazers. But I don't immediately think of other organisations of that size in the UK.
Well, sorry. There was a time, I think, when the ICA had that role, for a bit at least, and I think, I was actually external examiner to a very interesting thesis at Middlesex University, and that was actually all about the sort of early experimental years of the ICA and kind of why it sort of went away from its mission. And Lucy Bailey was she got the PhD out of that. I think she's now working at Tate but I think there was a lot in there really about that sort of early mission that they really had from the 40s through to perhaps, interestingly, through until the move that was made down to the Mall. And I think before then, the ICA in particular was a bit of a hub for this sort of thing and this discourse between arts and science, and they sort of lost that a bit. And they then did a bit more during the sort of early years of net art in the sort of mid-90s to the early 2000s, and then again kind of dropped the baton. So yeah, they could have done it, but perhaps at the moment, the way the arts are configured, perhaps it's hard to have a single hub which does that sort of thing.
Do you really want that though? Do you really want a central organisation that decides who gets the money and who doesn't?
That was about what I was about to say. Yeah.
Then you're
Yeah.
out.
Yes.
You look at the film industry in this country. If you're not in the club, you're not in the club.
No, I see it as a huge enrichment that we have lots of different organisations. Eva London collaborates with the Lumen Prize, it collaborates with FLUX, it collaborates with other people like Cass and so on. We don't want to be one, we want to be separate organisations that enjoy each other's company and collaborating with each other. The last thing in the world we want to be is one global organisation with lots of rules. No thanks, but no thanks. No, you won't get it from my side.
All right, well, I acknowledge that, but definitely places like the ZKM or like Ars Electronica, you look at what, it's a sort of, again, a sort of halo effect. If you've got one of those, then perhaps it helps the rest of them to sort of, it could raise all boats. So I take on board exactly what you're saying, and I sort of agree with it to a degree, but nonetheless, there is that sort of sense that if you've got a, dare I say, a driver like Peter Weigel, for instance, sort of finally making the ZKM possible, and, in many ways a controversial figure himself. However, nonetheless, it's sort of driven some of the discourse in Germany, certainly around the media arts, and I think it's had a beneficial effect overall. And also, the other thing, of course, is that the ZKM's a, it's very much an archival and sort of place of preservation, and has actually helped to preserve the history. And I think maybe that's what we lack, is that sort of a place where the things could be actually centrally acquired and acquisition and restored.
Yeah. Just on that point, I think it's similar for the field of art and health. I think it's also lacking that central hub.
You've got the Welcome though. The Welcome fulfills some of that role for the arts and health.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. But
I
I guess yes, of course. But I guess it still has created certain biases within the approach to arts and health.
Of course.
And this is what our project is trying to change. And all that point earlier about the digital means of accessing arts, this is actually something, this is one of the reasons why Hearts has started, because the whole point was to try to understand the ubiquitous, the everyday participation with the different art forms. And we found that it's actually quite interesting to hear that you also really struggle with this and with trying to capture that, because we found it incredibly difficult to measure, and we found no previous studies really trying to, it's just incredibly difficult to capture that, and it's interesting to hear that some of that could be due to curatorial, because how do you really...
Controversial Instagram.
Okay.
I said it was controversial.
Yeah,
but they've got data points on specific artworks. You can see how many people like it, crude as it is. It's a starting point. The huge mass of data. So if you're looking at ways to actually separate off these paintings by Da Vinci are particularly popular with this demographic in this geography, yes, you have to get access to the Instagram's data, but it's a pretty good way of tracking specific imagery. Visual, it's very specific imagery.
You can crowdsource curation to some degree, and some museums have done that in the past. They've actually tried to encourage a bit of crowdsource curation with different degrees of success. So I think it's possible. Yeah.
Great. I will come back to my question. I'm thinking I think the thing is with having a central institution or an institution is the sort of validation of the art form, of the media arts, digital art, arts that cross, they're interdisciplinary, they cross the boundaries between art and science, what a technologist is, what an electrician is, what an artist, or how, and we feel like we need some sort of validation by somebody to say, oh yeah, you're okay, you're just as good as everybody else. And I think that's maybe what's lacking, is that kind of, it's an acceptable form of art. It's so difficult to get kind of recognised or to understand where you fit within the sort of traditional funding structures or within the arts world, or, you know, where do we fit? And so I wonder, how does your organisation kind of tackle these things, or how are you bringing people together, and how are we validating these types of ideas?
I always think we have to be very careful about how each other are judged. At EVA London, we are very fortunate that when someone writes a proposal to us, it goes out to 3 or 4 peer reviewers all over the world anonymously, and the remarks come back. 2 sets of remarks come back, in fact, will let you into our darkest closet secrets. One set of remarks are helpful comments to the person who has written the proposal, like, I would do a bit more about this if I were you, if you write the paper. Other bits are, I wouldn't touch this with a barge pole to the organising committee, or whatever. Fortunately, there aren't too many of them, but basically, it's peer reviewed by other people anonymously. Therefore, there is not a specific judgment in it. Now, the moment you end up with any organisation where you start to have levels or judgments or whatever, which are judged by specific people, I think you can run into problems. The whole point of having an external examiner, and Nick and I have both been external examiners, is that we can come along and look at what any member of staff of a course has done at any level and say, I think not. You've given little Jimmy too little, because we can't do that. What we can say is, I don't think your marking has a parity across the board or something. So there is this sort of thing. I'm waffling on a bit. There's an outfit that I don't want to name tonight who have asked me to save them, and I can't. But they are a large English photographic society, and they have their own system of fellowships and associateships and licentiateships, and the criteria for it are so awful that I won't have anything to do with them. And I think with anything at all that we look at doing to judge ourselves, peer judgment amongst groups of people is lovely. Having 1 or 2 people say this is right and this is wrong is dangerous. I don't like.
The peer review process is not without bias.
It depends who you send it to. True.
He was invited to be a peer,
Yes.
and so that, just wanted to put that little addendum in.
That was it. Fair enough. It's slightly better than an individual choosing.
Yeah.
Well, I can just add to that the challenges of doing any kind of interdisciplinary work are always there. So we also have that in across the sciences, that it's very often whoever crosses the boundaries, it's difficult not to feel like you're a generalist, that you're not really an expert in what you do. And I think that's again slowly changing. So the UKRI is slowly starting to acknowledge that, to make sure that people get the right support, and that also the different career paths are being now understood for these more interdisciplinary paths. But it's just a lot more difficult to understand them, and there's actually very little research trying to understand the different challenges and the career progression of people who do more interdisciplinary research, at least in science, which it sounds like it might be the same for you guys.
Yeah.
Well, certainly from the Computer Arts Society point of view, we try to encourage, the widest possible number of people to come in to give lectures and things. But in practice, it often means me just trying to look through my contact book and see, who, what's piqued my interest or whatever. And I'm not saying I'm the one who runs everything, but sometimes by default it turns out to be precisely the thing that Graham was saying, that one or two people end up trying to determine what the organisation does. So I'm not defending my choices, but just saying that's kind of how it is by default. Wearing my I'm also a judge for the Lumen competition as well. I won't say exactly how that works, but I will say that we've been encouraging and also received, per year we've been getting 500, 600 applicants from about 40 different countries. And, there's a sense there that that's a very good cross-section of what's going on in digital art right now. And I think that, there has been a kind of a word-of-mouth effect that gradually the sort of existence of the prize has led to more people applying, and then the fact that a very wide range of countries have ended up winning it, and therefore that seems to have spread the word further. So perhaps that's the way to get around this issue, is to sort of just increase your, how should I say, increase your footprint as far as possible to reach as many people as possible. But, Computer Art Society can do better in that respect, and I hope it will, under my leadership or somebody else, who knows. Yeah.
Was the original question about kind of acceptance within the domain and...
Yeah.
Haven't we being human people over centuries, been having these kind of conversations at the advent of every kind of new media of expression? So, when photography came along, painting was dead, and when digital came along, analog was dead, and the new thing that replaced it wasn't being taken seriously. So I think there is a trajectory, and I can see there is we are in a kind of more accepted, there is transition into mainstream. You do see more and more digital arts and interdisciplinary science-based arts practices in mainstream arts venues. The bio-art book was launched at Tate Modern a year or two ago, which was very encouraging.
Yeah.
There was a bio-art work of sorts in the Turbine Hall. I won't say too much about that. But yeah, and Serpentine AI works, and I think we are, we're going to see more and more of it. I think it is just a trajectory, and then in 20 years' time we'll be having another conversation about whatever the kind of new thing is and wanting it to be taken seriously, and maybe there's something nice about not being part of the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Having to kick a little bit harder. Maybe I'm romantic in that regard.
Absolutely. I am just going to ask one more question, I think, and then after that we can wrap. But I will just ask this one question. So what I want to know is, how can we, all of our organisations, collaborate, or so like we are this evening, or what can we do in the future to promote this type of thing, to promote networks, to promote collaboration, and to champion the sort of art, technology, sciences? How can we make a pledge now to each other and move forward somehow? Or what can we do, basically? What are your thoughts and ideas on how we can carry this discourse that's been going on this evening through into the future, into next year, let's say?
Well, it is sort of why we're here tonight, and why we were at Dalston a year ago, and why we got so many people from FLUX involved in the V&A Digital Futures we did in DCS last summer, and what we're looking to do with as many of you as possible who would like to come and join in with us next year and get a bursary to actually learn how to write an academic paper and get themselves published, which is what I have on offer for any of you out there who would like to do it. It's terribly important that we just keep talking to each other, and it's fundamentally that. It is perhaps where you have committees and things that it's been very useful to have Aphra now sitting on the EVA London committee. It's very important that I last night was at the Computer Arts Society AGM. It is actually an intermingling network that each other's voices sit when decisions are made on each other's panels and so on. And I think that is the way forward. The rest then follows from that, because that's how you build the collaborations, but it's a very good way of networking, is that we get someone from one organisation to sit in on the organising committee of another organisation and represent their voice. And that way you actually have a joined up writing of it overall. And that's really my way of going about it and what we're trying to do.
So I mean, there's the obvious thing of shared digital resources, that we all sort of to some degree share calendars of events and make sure perhaps also that we schedule things so they don't clash, or if they're going to clash we may as well work together and be in the same event. But I mean, there's a lot of that going on as well, so I'm sure we get some digital resources together using our ingenuity and the things that we're supposed to be good at. But also, I mean, there's a huge amount to be said for actually sort of physical contact and sort of in engaging people, and also finding points of shared genuine interest, rather than just saying, well, we all got to do the same things really, etc. Well, we don't necessarily. We overlap to some degree, but also we have our own areas of specialisation, which is great, and I think we shouldn't sort of erase those boundaries unnecessarily, because we all speak to slightly different communities. So I think we understand where the points of contact are, also what we do well in our own sort of orgs, and then find, if we can look at best practice between us all, and see what each group does particularly well, and perhaps where others could learn from it. I think we ought to share that too. So understand as a community of practitioners and practice where the good practice is found in organisation as much as anything. And but let's keep doing what we're doing as well.
I agree with all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Have I got anything to add? No, I mean, I think it's about maybe using different platforms. So we are embracing the digital and the physical and the experiential and the conversational. And maybe it's a question that we can just put out to you as you have another drink and carry on those conversations. Because you will be doing things to communicate and expand the field.
If I can do a quickie.
Yeah.
At the end of the EVA conference last year, we put together this thing called Research in Education, which was inviting 9 of London's top digital colleges, universities, to come in with some of their students and staff and talk about what they were doing. I was told in the beginning there isn't a cat in hell's chance that you're actually going to get these people who are so secretive about their research and not sharing it with competing institutions together. And the day turned out to be absolutely phenomenal, and people mixing with each other. And if the gods are really with me, we will actually see some proposals coming into EVA London that perhaps have someone from Hertfordshire and someone from Greenwich who've met that afternoon, who will be doing a joint paper. That sort of thing would be brilliant. But it is these sorts of things of actually trying to do the daft bit, invite lots of colleges to come and show off what they do and talk to each other. And I'm delighted that particular one's worked. It's a project that we're now looking to take on the road and do Southwest England in next March, and possibly Manchester next year, and so on. So we actually take this package, and the idea that we bring groups of colleges in an area together with successful alumni and people who employ digital artists and so on, and actually get them to talk to each other, because it's the only sensible way forward, and it is the networking that we need.
Oh, Terry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Aphra, thank you for bringing everybody together. I think it's been an amazing meeting, and it's made me think, which is what this is all about, is it not?
Yeah.
You see, one of the things why institutions won't work to cover what we do, and museums won't work, as you know, it's because what we're involved in is something absolutely huge. What I mean by huge is, first of all, talking about digital technology as technology. What we can now do gets bigger and bigger. we can actually spread what our message, which is a visual message, across a whole town if we want to. The technique exists to do that. It hadn't used to exist. But we can actually make a virtual environment. We rely less on traditional architecture. I'm an architect, remember. And we can actually now do things with digital, virtual techniques, which only Buckminster Fuller ever dreamt about. And there are now one or two other people who are catching up with what he thought all those years ago. So I think what I'm trying to say, it's a matter of scale. The scale of what we do is absolutely huge. Graham mentions, very rightly, our various conferences at EVA. And the last one, which was July, I think, 4 of us, Andy Lomas, myself, 2 scientists, and we talked about the genius of Turing. And remember, we rely on Turing for all of this. And he said the point at which a computer would pass the Turing test would be 2052. Now, the Google man, what's his name? Kingsville, you know the Google man. He now said it's 2029. Now, when that point of singularity is reached, the world is ours. That's all I've got to say.
Yes! Well done! Great.
Belongs to me.
I think that's, I actually don't know, I'm not going to sum up. The world is ours. I would like to thank my speakers very, very much for coming along and participating. I think it's been a fantastic evening. I will, without even asking Oliver's permission, pledge that we will do this again. And we might even do it with a few more organisations or in a slightly different format. But because I think it's really important for us to learn from each other, and it's been really illuminating to be with everybody this evening. So
my cards are here. If you want to come and see me afterwards.
Yeah, we've all got cards, and it will. And we've got everything has been recorded from this evening. Everybody's details are on the website with links to their websites. Your next talks event is on our, which went out today, on our newsletter. If you're not joined up to our newsletter, you can join up, and I will pop it on again because we'll send one next week. We have got our next FLUX event on the 20th of November here. Maria will be curating that one and hosting it. It will be to do with wearables, I think, and I am doing a workshop in November to make these little guys. If you've been wondering what that is what you can make in my workshop. A couple of people are signed, well, quite a few. In fact, I'm nearly sold out. I've got 1 ticket left. 1 ticket left.
Wow.
They've been on sale for like 7 days. 1 ticket left. So if you'd like to come and join me, you can find out more about that. I'll post that on FLUX as well. So thank you ever so much. What a fantastic evening. Thank you.